Let's just dive right in. John D. Rockefeller built a fortune so massive it was, well, bigger than the economies of most countries. But here's the thing. Before he built that empire, he wrote 38 private letters to his son. And in them, he laid out the ruthless psychological principles that built it all. Today, we're unlocking 9 of this one idea. It's the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. See, Rockefeller didn't just put up with his tough upbringing. He saw it as the very thing that forged his character. For him, hardship wasn't some obstacle to success. It was the only way to get there.
38. He wrote 38 of these letters. Think about that for a second. This wasn't some book for the public. Nope. This was a direct download of a mental operating system from a father to his son, specifically designed to build an empire that would last for generations.
So we're going to break his wisdom down into 3 parts. First, we'll build the mind, what he called the inner fortress. Then we'll look at how he dealt with the outside world, his rules of engagement. And finally, we'll explore how he planned for a true legacy in the enduring empire.
But before we get into the nuts and bolts, you have to understand this is not a list of business tips. What we're talking about here is a complete psychological framework, a pretty ruthless mindset for anyone who has serious ambition.
All right, let's start with part 1, the inner fortress. For Rockefeller, every single thing he did on the outside, every deal, every dollar earned, it all started with an absolutely unshakable foundation on the inside. His first principle is that you have to embrace difficulty. You have to seek it out. Rockefeller came from poverty and was in a constant state of struggle, but instead of breaking him, it built him. He truly believed that if you actively avoid discomfort, you are actively choosing to avoid growth. Greatness, you see, has a price, and that price is deliberate suffering.
And that leads directly to his second principle. Persistence is what turns failure into a breakthrough. Most people, they quit after a few setbacks. But the innovators, the real winners, they know that failure number 5,000 might be the one right before everything clicks. They don't just tolerate failure, they fully expect it.
Principle 3. You have to find a real purpose in your work or you're just going to live a life of misery. Rockefeller loved this story to make his point. Imagine 3 sculptors. The first one, he sees his work as punishment, and so he finds misery. The second one sees a paycheck, and he has, well, a job. But the third sculptor, he sees art. He sees a grander purpose. He's the one who ends up building cathedrals. Your perspective, it doesn't just change your mood. It literally determines the scale of your success.
So this brings us to his fourth and maybe his most brutal principle: eradicate all excuses. Rockefeller believed excuses were a self-inflicted poison, holding people back way more than any external barrier ever could. So he'd ask you, directly, what's yours? You know, he saw the same deadly excuses over and over again. Oh, I'm not healthy enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not lucky enough. His comeback was always brutal, and man, was it effective. Admiral Nelson had 1 arm and 1 eye, and he defeated Napoleon's entire fleet. The difference? Nelson had a mission, not excuses.
Okay, let's shift gears. It's time for part 2. How does this inner fortress actually translate to action in the real world? These are Rockefeller's rules of engagement, his principles for waging the war of business and finance.
Principle 5 is all about mastering your relationship with money. He never worshipped it. He saw it as a tool, and he captured it perfectly with this idea. Money is fire. If you use it correctly, it provides warmth and power. But if it becomes your master, it will burn your entire life to the ground.
And this flows right into Principle 6. Business is war, so you have to attack indirectly. When a rival tried to challenge Standard Oil by building a new pipeline, Rockefeller didn't fight them head-on. No, that's exactly what they expected. Instead, he launched a flank attack on their biggest weakness. He bought the railroads they relied on and completely crushed their business without a single direct fight.
So how did he pull off strategies like that? He relied on Principle 7, master negotiation like it's a weapon. His framework was basically a tactical checklist. Information is your ammunition. Emotion is an opportunity. You assess the environment, you know exactly what resources you have, you find their weakness, you clarify your own goal, and then you read their emotional state to strike and close the deal. So, once the money starts coming in, what's the next move? Principle 8 is probably his most famous financial rule: reinvest relentlessly. He lived on just 10% of his profits. The other 90%, it went right back into the engine of his empire. As he put it, men fail because they spend tomorrow's fortune on today's pleasures.
And finally, let's move to part 3, the enduring empire. See, for Rockefeller, just piling up a huge fortune wasn't the end game. Not at all. The real goal was to build something that would outlive him and echo for generations to come.
This brings us to his 9th and final principle.
Reputation is the only currency that outlasts riches. Standard Oil for him was just the beginning. It was the engine for what came next. The true Rockefeller legacy wasn't built on oil. It was built on the institutions, like the Rockefeller Foundation, that are still changing the world today. Money fades, but a powerful reputation echoes for generations.
So as we wrap this up, I want you to think of these principles not as historical facts, but as an inheritance. Yeah, Rockefeller wrote these for his son, but in doing so, he left behind a blueprint for anyone who's a true heir of ambition.
These aren't just tips for business. They are rules for building an empire. You embrace hardship because it builds your character. You persist through every single failure. You treat business like a strategic war. You reinvest with ruthless discipline. And you always remember that your reputation is the final and most valuable currency you will ever own.
Rockefeller laid out his rule book, his guide for building an empire of both wealth and legacy. He passed them on. And so now, the question isn't just about understanding his rules, it's about defining your own. These were his rules. What will yours be?